This session is Talking Twig. My name is Charley Pugmire. That picture looks really big on the slide. That's kind of embarrassing. But, okay, like I said, my name is Charley Pugmire. I am a senior software engineer at a company called ICF Olson. I'm from Minneapolis. Here's just a couple ways you can get a hold of me. Email, website. You can find me in most places as Pug Life, or if you can't find me at that, try it again, Pug Life, Pug Life. So, here's just what we're going to get through today. Do some really quick Twig background. Actually, before we get to this, how many of you guys are familiar with Twig? Have you used it? Have you built Drupal 8 sites? Okay, cool. So,
Can you speak up? I'm sorry. We're having a hard time hearing you back here.
okay, yeah, sorry. So we'll go over some very basic Twig background. I'm not going to get too deep into the basics, just enough to establish sort of a baseline understanding of Twig. I would highly recommend reading the Twig documentation. It's excellent. Makes it super easy to learn if you haven't done so already. Then we'll get into Twig and Drupal 8, Drupal 8's specific implementation of Twig. Sorry. And some of the Drupal specific add-ons that they've included. Then we're going to talk through creating better field templates. I have some suggestions for how you can approach this to better make use of some of Twig's best features. And then because some of this is kind of conceptual, I'm going to leave some time at the end for questions, and we'll get to that. This whole talk is actually based on a blog post I wrote at the end of last year that was called Extendable Field Templates in Drupal 8. Here's a link for it if you want to check that out, and a Google link for it. Also, I want to bring up there are some code snippets throughout this. So I formatted them the best I could, but it's kind of tough in this little container to represent that. So the slides are up on the MidCamp site. If you want to download those and follow along, feel free to do that. So, some Twig background. Twig is a templating language built in PHP. Compiles to plain PHP. If you haven't dug around in what it actually compiles to, I would suggest checking it out. It's kind of bizarre and hard to read, but you can find it in your site/default/files/php/twig. You get the full compiled version of what these templates look like. Created by Fabien Potencier, created Symfony. It's secure, fast, and like I said, with the documentation they provide, very easy to learn. So here are the Twig Essentials. We have three different kind of blocks. We have do something blocks, which is assigning variables, loops, control structures, things like that. We have say something blocks, which is the double curly brace, and then comment blocks, which aren't super important here, but that is the third type. Into some of the more advanced features, we have filters, which Drupal 8 has extended a bit beyond Twig's basic filter functionality, but that's basically a way to run the content of a say something block through a function. So in this case, we have upper, which is a filter that translates a string or converts a string into all uppercase. And then these are the big two that are going to come up repeatedly throughout this talk, so we'll get familiar with them. Here we have the idea of Twig blocks, which I should point out, blocks in Twig are a separate thing from blocks in Drupal, which are a separate thing from blocks in Sass. So everyone uses this name, but in this case we have Twig blocks, which is a way to establish parent-child relationships between templates. Then we also have the include functionality, which if you guys have done any experimenting with component-driven development, this is really the crux of what that is built on. It is a way to sort of abstract display logic from content logic or business logic. So you'll see this come up from time to time. I won't cover it too heavily here. Some more of the advanced Twig functions. We have concatenation, which if you've dug around in any of the core templates, you've probably already seen this, but it's the tilde symbol there in the middle, which is a way to either concatenate strings or interpolate variables and concatenate those. We also have, these next two are going to come up quite a bit, so be sure to recognize this syntax. We have the Twig ternary, which is a shorthand for a if-else statement, basically. The top one there is the longhand, and then there's the shorthand. And at the end, we have what is called null coalescer. So what this means is basically an ultra shorthand for the second option under ternary. So what this means is if classes is set and is not null, we will implement that assignment. Otherwise, we will fall back to the value of field. This is really the crux of my talk, in a way to extend your Twig templating to be a little more efficient. Another thing that's going to come up quite a bit, so I just want to cover it here, make sure everyone kind of has a base understanding of this, is BEM. Stands for Block Element Modifier. Maybe you guys are familiar with this. If you, once again, if you've dug through any of the core templates, you've probably seen this syntax before. If you're familiar with just kind of vanilla CSS, this might be a little scary looking because underscores and hyphens and double hyphens is a little weird to see, a little jarring at first. But it's really just a naming convention to generate modular and flat CSS. And when I say flat, I mean CSS that is easy to override. You know, it doesn't have long nested selectors, things like that. So here we have, up the top we have just a little block that I pulled out from the Drupal.org site. If we were laying this out in BEM, we might call this a call out. Then any element within that would have call out, and then 2 underscores, and then what that element is within the block. So we would have call out headline, which is up at the top. We might have a call out item, which corresponds to each icon with its link, and then call out icon, which would be the SVG or whatever, or image or whatever it is. Then, say if we wanted to have this themed differently, if we have a different page with a slightly different color theme, you know, maybe we invert it, then what we would do is actually we'd have call out and then hyphen hyphen. Now this is a modifier, so now we're doing a theme dark. And really here all we need to define are the differences between our dark theme and the regular theme. So double underscore is a modifier, double hyphen is, or no, double underscore is an element, double hyphen is a modifier. So now to Drupal 8's implementation of Twig. The 2 big things to call out here are template suggestions. Once again, if you've done any custom theming, this is something you're probably familiar with. The way this works is that any field in Drupal will inherit from a template based on the naming convention of the template file. So the more specific ones are at the top. Those are what it looks for first. If it doesn't find anything that matches this formula here, it will go to the next one, and so on down the list. If it doesn't find any overrides, it will fall back to the basic field.html template. Then we have Drupal specific filters. Like I said, filters are just a function that you run the output of a Twig variable through, or a Twig or a string. The Drupal specific ones are trans, which is for translation, format date, raw, which is a way to not escape HTML that is contained in your string. We also have without, which is by far my favorite one. This is a way to output a content block or a render array while skipping certain fields within it. So typically this is used in conjunction with a variable called content, which contains your entire render array for a page or a field. We also have clean class, which is just a way to translate a string into a syntax that is compatible with a CSS class. So this will remove spaces. It will also remove, I believe if it starts with a number, it will remove the number, translates, I think I said spaces into hyphens, and etc. There's also a couple more. I have a link there if you want to go check these out. So let's look at what the anatomy of a template in Drupal is. And this is going to be kind of hard to follow along with. It's going to be a little small, but I'm going to try and talk through these chunks the best I can. So at the top here we have a set of classes that are defined. And then we move into some logic here. So the best thing about how Drupal implements Twig is that it has hooks for configuration that you can change in the CMS. So this means you can turn off things like labels in the admin and have that reflected in your front end. It also means you can, if a field has multiple values, that is reflected here. And so it allows site builders without a lot of dev experience to make impactful changes to the layout of your site. It also provides a ton of classes, as you see up at the top. This is where we have some concatenation. So we output the field with its name also gets added as a class, etc. There's a lot here, but it covers a lot of the Twig basics. And there's a link there if you want to actually dig through this in a more legible fashion on Drupal.org. But one thing you'll also notice is that every element in here is a div. So the item is output in a div, the labels are in divs, the container is a div, but this kind of eliminates all semantic markup. Any of the valuable HTML elements that we have available to us are not used here. So, and we'll see that here in a couple examples. So, example of the first one, this is using Classes template. Here's just a couple. On the left-hand side, you see just a few example pieces of configuration that you would set through the Drupal admin, and then what the corresponding output in your HTML would be. So, in this case, we have a field called callout headline. We'll allow one value. We'll say that the label is hidden, and we'll output it in plain text. So what that looks like on the right-hand side is what you see here. We have the quick edit module enabled, which outputs this long string. And then these are all the classes that get added to this. And you'll see it's wrapped in a div. There is no label. Version number 2. So let's say we have an attribute list that goes with a product, for example, and we want to output it. We call attribute list. We would give it an unlimited number of values. We'd output the label, and once again, in plain text. This is just an example of what that would look like in your page once it renders. So we have, our div field label, div field items, and then each of those elements would output in a div called field item. But you'll see here, there, like I said, it's not very semantic. There's not any clear indication of hierarchy between these elements. What we call this is divitus. So if we want to work with these templates, if we want to customize them a bit, how does Drupal suggest we do that? This is taken straight out of the documentation from a page called Working with Twig Templates. And they say to override templates, you locate the one you want to override, copy it into your theme folder, rename it based on the conventions that we showed a couple slides ago, and then modify it to your liking. So this is going to get real small, and sorry about this again, but I'll try and walk you through this. So what this looks like practically is, this is a couple examples of creating custom field templates. Can you see the mouse here? Yeah. Okay. So up top we have our classes, our title classes, but let's say that we're creating a template for this callout headline field. So we want that to output in an H3 instead of a div, because that's more semantically correct. It's also, it'll help with our styling as well. So what we'd have to do is copy this template in and replace that div with an H3, which you can see here and here. Now, how about our attributes list example we talked about? This is what a template for that might look like. If we want this to output in a unordered list element, which is right here, and then each element within that in an LI. Here's another example of one that you might need to add a class to trigger some JavaScript. So we have one class added to the bottom of this list that says JS toggle open. Otherwise, everything else is the same. And then here's one where, if we want to output a list of several values in line that's comma separated, we could do that with some extra logic here, using the loop variable. This is intentionally really confusing to look at. So, as you can see, there's a lot of duplication here. It's hard to tell the difference between these templates at first glance. This is going to be really difficult to maintain. So, how do popular themes handle this? Typically, developers, they're smart people. They will kind of come to a conclusion about what the best practice is for handling an issue like this. So we're going to take a look through a couple of popular themes and see if they fix this issue that we pointed out with too many classes, no semantic markup, and a lot of repetition. So that can take on two forms. We can either create a base theme that implements a more simple version of a field template, or we can create a child theme and then override a template to be a little more workable. So let's take a look at how these themes do this. Unfortunately, no one's figured it out. They all do it exactly the same way. So Bootstrap does not have a base theme. It is its own base theme, but they copied in the template from Classy, just copy and paste it into the theme. Omega, another popular theme, has a base theme of Classy and inherits the field template from there. Zen does exactly the same thing. I do also want to point out, I just noticed this the other day, but the base theme that was copied into, or the base template that was copied into Bootstrap does not implement BEM correctly. So if you try to transfer some styles across themes, in this case, it would not work. And that is because right here you see we have field dash dash items. As we said before, dash dash indicates a modifier, whereas in this case what they actually mean to do is add an element. So someone should bring that up with them. I suppose I could do that. So this is where we're going to get a little deep in the weeds for a minute. Feel free to stop me if you guys have questions. This is going to be a little bit conceptual. It's going to be a few more code snippets, but they're in smaller chunks. So hopefully this will be a little easier to follow along. We're going to create a better field.html.twig template. Woo! Let's go. So why are we doing this? Just a quick recap. We want more semantic markup. This is the reason that HTML5 exists. We have elements like nav and audio and things like that, but as we saw, currently all we use is divs. We can fix that. It'll be cleaner. We're going to have one template that's going to do all the heavy lifting, and then we're going to let all of our child templates, the only differences will be the things that have changed. It'll be easier to maintain. As you saw before, if you're looking across all these templates with a lot of duplication, it's hard to follow, difficult to maintain, and there's just going to be less code. So how are we going to do this? I realize I just said less code and now I have a wall of text. There will be less code when we're done. So we're going to be able to add custom classes without having to do all that duplication. We're going to have custom elements. We're going to have semantic elements. And like I've said, we're going to have minimal duplication. So what this really is, this next section, is a proposal for how I think either Core or Classy or one of the big themes should implement base templates. So I'd love to hear your feedback after the talk if you think that what I'm going to propose is a good idea. So, step 1, custom CSS classes. On the left here, you see Classy's field.html.twig template. This is the section at the top where they lay out all these classes. I'd argue it's too many classes, but that's another discussion for another day. So my suggestion is to use one of Twig's features, the null coalescing ternary, and say that if we don't have any classes, let's fall back to this set. Otherwise, if we do define some classes, we'll use those instead. And I'm going to show an example of what this looks like in just a second. Now for custom HTML elements. On the left, this is kind of the guts of Classes field template. This ellipses indicates the stuff I cut out. It's basically a lot of repetition, once again. So this is the guts of it. My suggestion here on the right is, once again, to use this null coalescing ternary and say if we have an element, let's set it to that element, otherwise let's fall back to a div. And then here, this is the core line right here. So we're going to wrap our field in whatever element is defined here. What does this look like in action? So, using the Twig blocks and the Twig extends, you can see here at the top, we're extending our new field.html template. We're going to set the classes equal to callout headline, and we're going to set the element equal to an h2. That's our template. That is it. It is 3 lines, and at the bottom you see it outputs exactly what we wanted there. Simpler classes. We have a good element wrapping it. This is more semantic, and you have to tell me that's a lot easier to read. So with that pattern in mind that I've kind of stepped through really quickly, I'm going to kind of wave the magic wand, and this is where we're going to end up with our final template. So this is what I propose you use for a base field.html.twig template. It probably looks pretty familiar. It's not that different from the initial one, but the maintenance of this and the output of it is going to be infinitely easier to work with. So here at the top, we're going to set multiple variables, things like classes and HTML elements for our wrappers, our labels, etc. But everything else down here is essentially the same. So that's the kind of in the weeds stuff. So now we're going to actually implement that. So you remember these templates from a couple slides ago? We're trying to do a headline field in the top left, a list field in the top right, add some JavaScript classes in the bottom left, and then modify our output into a comma-separated list in the bottom right. Now, using our new template, those templates end up looking like this. So in the top left, all we have to do is set our element. Set our element and extend our base template. In the top right, all we have to do is set our wrapper element for the whole set of fields and set the individual element here. Once again, 3 lines. Bottom left, all we have to do is extend our field template and add our JavaScript class here. Bottom right is an example that this is not a magic bullet. So we still have to lay out all the things that are different about the markup here because, and hopefully if you either downloaded the slides or can see this tiny type, you see we still have this variable here to output a comma in between each of our variables. So this doesn't solve every problem, but it solves a lot of them. A couple notes about this approach. First is that organization is key. Excuse me. If you're going to go with this approach, you're going to end up with a lot of field templates. You could end up bloating your theme quite a bit, but luckily Twig searches your templates folder recursively, so no matter how many folders you have in there, it will find them. So organize them by, if you want all your field ones together, If you want to group them by content type, it's completely up to you, but it's important to organize them in a way that will preserve sanity. It is not a mandate. You do not have to do this for every field. As you saw with what we call the null coalescing ternary, we fall back to a set of classes and elements that already exist in classing. So you don't need to do this if you don't want to. The third is reusing BEM. So one of the issues with the BEM syntax is that every field or every class is only relevant in the context of its block. So for example, that screenshot from Drupal.org, you saw each of those icons. If you use those icons somewhere else, they're in a different context. So your B in the block is then different. So what you can do here is take advantage of Drupal's naming suggestions and make a more specific name template in the instance where you want to reuse a field across multiple pages or across multiple contexts. The next thing is that Drupal does not need to know about all of your templates, which may sound weird, but let me show you how you can use this to your advantage. So let's say, for example, we have a product site. We have two different product pages or two different content types. We have, for example, a toaster and a, microwave. So let's say the page layouts are nearly identical. It's just that some of the fields across each of those are different. So you might have a price field on both. You might have a title field on both. But whereas your microwave might have watts or however you measure a microwave, toaster might have, I don't know, some other toaster feature. Like power, I don't know how to measure toaster power. So what you would do in this case, you would lay out this field or this template here, which is called node product base. That doesn't correspond to any content type in Drupal. Drupal has no idea that this template exists. And you can have your, maybe your overview, your title, your image, things like that, and then your specs info, which would be, power, price, weight, all that kind of stuff. So then here, what we can do with our toaster is we can extend this product base and then only override the toaster-specific pieces of it. Additionally, here with the microwave, we can do the same thing. Extend this base template and only add the things that are relevant to the microwave. So the idea here is that you create the layout once and you just inject the content as you need to. And really, that's the core tenet behind component-driven theming, which is typically done with the include syntax that I showed earlier. But this is the same idea of separating your display logic, which would be at the top, from your business logic, which would be the second two. So every example I've walked through so far was around field templates. The good news is this doesn't only apply to field templates. This applies to blocks, this applies to inputs, forms, paragraphs, any other Drupal entity you can think of. So an example that I'll just run through really quick here is blocks, for example. So on the left, we have, this is essentially Classy's block template. Here we have a slightly modified version of the block template. You'll notice the only difference really is our null coalescing ternary and our title element. So then how we would use that, we see here on the right. Here's an example. Actually, this is taken from essentially from a project I worked on recently where we had a base block template that had a contact block that appeared on a bunch of different pages. But on one specific page, we needed to inject a chat widget. So what I did was take the base block template and extend it. That's just this part here. So we have this, which is another Twig feature called parent, where you can just inherit everything that came from the parent. It's not just a clever name. And then add any additional features here. So in this case, we're attaching a library called chat. So we have a full duplicated block template that modifies 2 lines of code there. So I've kind of thrown a lot at you, and I know this is pretty in the weeds in parts, a little specific. There are a lot of people out there in the community that will help you with this kind of stuff. So, like I said in the beginning, Twig documentation is amazing. You should read it. It's probably one of the best examples of documentation that I've come across in terms of frameworks. Second link here is the Drupal Twig Slack, separate from the Drupal Slack because it is Twig focused. There's a lot of smart people in here that always help you with any kind of Twig related questions. I would highly recommend checking that out. From that, there's a series that a guy named Mark Conroy started. I don't know if he started the Drupal Twig Slack or if he's just an admin in it, but he started this blog series called Things I Learned in Drupal Twig, or Drupal Twig Slack. Here's a link to the first volume of that. He lays out just screenshots from Slack conversations where people collaborate to figure out problems. And then I wanted to get into a few of these. These are the top 13 Drupal Twig helper modules. There are a handful of modules that make theming with Twig a lot easier. One of the biggest hurdles I found in my experience with Twig was just getting the raw value of a field output and not having to have some crazy array syntax. There's a module in here that's listed on this page called Twig Tweak that takes care of that for you. So I'd highly recommend checking that out. That's all I had. So like I said, I wanted to leave some time for questions. So I know this was a little conceptual, but yeah, if you guys have any Twig related questions, let's hear them.
Is the URL for your slides on the presentation page?
It is, yeah. And I would recommend checking those out. Then you can blow up all the code snippets. And also that the link in the beginning, that link to the blog that I mentioned, has essentially all these code snippets as well, laid out with explanations and things like that. So, yeah.
Can you explain the toaster microwave part a little bit more?
Yeah, okay. I'm just going to bring it up. Okay.
The toaster and microwave are content types?
Yeah.
The actual content type, and then it's just the base is the only thing that's not a Drupal thing?
Right, so that is this base template here is the one thing Drupal doesn't know that this exists. It has no concept of what I call this node product base.html.twig. What you call it is not important in this case. What is important is that each of these correspond to a content type. That's why they follow this naming syntax of node -- product - toaster. So this is a product toaster content type, product microwave. And then, yeah, like I said, this one is going to lay out will be the basic layout for each one of these content types. You can have X number of them. But the only thing that you have to change in each of these is the things that are specific to that content type. So, product, television could also inherit from this and only override television specific. Anyone else? Yeah.
So you took Drupal's base field Twig file and you kind of remade it so that it's overridable.
Yep.
So are you submitting that to be the actual field template for core?
Well, that's what I'm asking you. I mean, if implementing this makes sense, because here's the best part about this, is it's out of the box 100% backwards compatible. So because of the way Twig ternaries work, all we can do, we can just add this one line, and if you want to override it, you can. If not, it falls back to the way Classy works now. So, yeah.
Is there anything regarding what you've done with altering the template file set classes? Is there anything that you would recommend that might not work for that, or might work for like a pre-process on like a global scale versus doing it in a parent Twig file?
So, my thought is that anything that has to do with display logic, if you can get it in a Twig template, get it in a Twig template.
Okay.
There are a couple exceptions to that. Things like, you know, on a recent project we had a drop down in the admin where you can pick a color theme for a page. So doing something like that is a lot harder in Twig than it is, a lot harder in Twig than it is in a pre-process function.
Well, it's kind of similarly, we have reusable elements on our sites, and users can specify a background image. And
Yep.
so when there's a background image, it's really hard to kind of like, or tedious really, to say if background image and URL is there and it's
Right.
empty
Right.
at class.
So, actually, to that point, this last link, I can't think of it. I don't know if it's Twig Tweak or if it's one of the other modules listed here, has that exact function where you can, because Twig functions are so easy to write and customize, they wrote a function that essentially in your Twig template you just say if field background image exists, I'll put it here, instead of having to do the long array syntax that comes with Drupal out of the box. So.
Okay, well, thanks.
Well, that's all I got. So unless anyone has any other questions, we're dismissed.